Member from Portland Eastern.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, I first wish to applaud you for even any consideration to such an amendment. It is one that is welcomed, I'm sure, from the population and from certain members that sit in this House who is inundated with requests for a second opportunity at a normal life. I wish to say, however, in terms of my contribution, that when it comes to crime in this country, we do know that there is mala prohibita, crimes by prohibition, and mala non se, which is the crimes of moral turpitude or serious crimes that sometimes when we think of crime, what we find is we just lump everybody together, and then there's a stigma that is attached to it that prevents many persons the opportunity to have gainful employment, especially in the security industry. Persons would have moved on with their lives from even minor crimes. And what you find is the requests for police record and the employment usually cease at that moment. Now, I raise the fact that I note that many of the sections, starting with the First Amendment, 3382, which is increasing the time, and we can lump them seriatim, deal with them in turn. I would say that I would have no objection to an increase, but to ask you, Minister, if there is any consideration as to appreciating that the threshold, the rehabilitation time I'm submitting to you is a little bit excessive. Equally, I would say at this point in time that when one looks at the capping, moving the period from 5 years to 10 years and capping it at 10 years, I would ask what informs the decision to stop at 10 years? And I would use, I have support in saying that certainly in England, and if we are to say that citizens in the UK, if they breathe the same air as us here in the Caribbean, then there must be a consideration of restoration of the life of a person who would have committed a crime after the rehabilitation time has passed. Now, we do have a robust schedule of offenses that I've seen you have also had suggested amendments. I'll deal with that. But to start with the point that in the United Kingdom, certainly there was an amendment in 2022 which says that at sentences 4 years and over, the rehabilitation period for adults is 7 years. And then they make reference to their schedule offense, their schedule 18 in the relevant legislation. That schedule has the offenses similar to ours, but makes it clear that mala prohibita, or crimes of prohibition, after the policy decision in the UK is to say that after the rehabilitation period, which is 7 years, they see it as 7 years. And the mature consideration in that is if we were to look at a 20-year-old, and I'm asking for the attention of all at this point. If we look at a 20-year-old who commits a crime of prohibition, and let's say it's perennial larceny, and he finds himself, because he has multiple convictions, and he gets now a sentence of 12 years. He's out of the rehabilitation period pool. And so he will never get the opportunity to have that burden away from him, despite the markers of rehabilitation. Now, if given the opportunity, after spending his incarceration of 12 years, he gets out at 32. Or if he gets good time and all is well, he gets out at 28 or 27. What we are asking now, Minister, is for him to wait an additional 15 years. And Damien is not here, but if I add the 15 to the 32, it seems to be about 47. And I'm saying to you that is a lifetime for a consideration before the board, as it is now constituted, for rehabilitation. And as I'm speaking here, as I'm standing before you, I make no, well, it's public knowledge, my own situation. And at 47 next week, Minister, one wonders what that would look like. What that would look like if I would now be on the road to try to put my life in with the opportunity of rehabilitation. So it's something greatly to consider that citizens of the United Kingdom, where we have our final court currently, the policy decision in the United Kingdom for their citizens is that the second opportunities must come, provided that the schedule which we have mature consideration of is saying that you must get the rehabilitation. In fact, just like our legislation, once convictions are spent, you cannot use it against the offender who has rehabilitated themselves. So in consideration, I would say in relation to this aspect of it, I'm urging you, Minister, and I know I will get pushback from some of my friends in this very house, but I'm urging you that we must not be pusillanimous in our charge to certainly, sir, yes, thank you, yes. We must not be stingy. We must not be a coward. We certainly am urging you, Minister, to stand with me on this one and be brave and consider a rehabilitation period and an entire overhaul of such a system for adult offenders to set the period at 7 years. I would also say to you that where the offense is not a part of the third schedule, so that we're not here in another 10 years or another 5 years, to once and for all revisit and say that the rehabilitation for persons 4 years or 5 years and more, that the period is 7 years. And we will look at a robust rehabilitation board and a rehabilitation policy that set the markers within the act, the legislation, so the board can look and thereafter empower the minister where they appeal after recommendation from the members of parliament that are inundated with requests for giving me a second opportunity, and they are in their communities and can sometimes speak for some of these citizens to say that they have shown markers of rehabilitation, the selfless life that they're living, and there's a case-by-case basis when convictions are spent and the board actually functions. And then it will no doubt, I will say, Minister, it will no doubt correct or put us on the path to the mischief that you're currently trying to correct with this amendment. And that would be a robust rehabilitation policy, empowering the board and giving the board teeth to give you recommendations to say, I have met an individual that has remarkable rehabilitation. And at that point, you ought to consider whether or not this is an exception to the rule. read it as is. With the mutuality assistance or the agreement with legislation, what we currently do is, if there is a foreign conviction, we look to our legislation and we automatically record the conviction currently. Now, the problem is, if an individual somehow gets that conviction expunged, then what the legislation ought to do is to confirm the expungement in the relevant jurisdiction, Minister, and thereafter there is automatic expungement in our jurisdiction rather than a consideration, because what we'd be doing is taking the harm but not giving the offender the benefit. So that's a consideration, and a proper wording then I would suggest would be, where a person's foreign conviction has been expunged under the laws of that foreign jurisdiction, the said conviction shall, once proven to the satisfaction of the board, be recognized as automatically expunged under Jamaican law. And I would say in the vein that it cannot be correct that the offense is expungible. But I would go as far as saying, if it is, because what happens here, what informs here is that if you manage to get the conviction expunged in the jurisdiction, and I'll stay in the Caribbean, throughout the Caribbean. If you go to Barbados or Trinidad and you get a conviction, it's recorded in Jamaica. If you manage to get it expunged in the jurisdiction that informed the conviction, then if you can prove to the board that was done, then the consideration, what's left to the board is that the board that's what. So it is that I'm saying to you, Minister, that a reading of the act, it can be, I can see where a board would say that's not the interpretation. And so the clear it's the wording that I'm saying, because I know the intent is clear. Yes. But well, and that's, well, I'm suggesting to you then, Minister, respectfully and humbly, that it should be automatic, because we automatically record it. And that is just my humble submission, and I'll repeat for emphasis that a correct wording so that there is no debate at a board with a colored panel with biases that we know not would be bound by a wording that says, where a person's foreign conviction has been expunged under the laws of that foreign jurisdiction, then the said conviction shall, once proven to the satisfaction of the board, be recognized as automatically expunged under Jamaican law. They said, yes, they said expungement once proven. Yes. No, I remember, so Minister, as I said, automatically recognized. The expungement, as in we're keeping with the mutuality of the agreement, the mutual assistance, the agreement, and the legislation, what informs us. Now, in relation to the juveniles, I'm just putting to you that I think once and for all we are to consider treating them as a separate class, as we now do by child diversion programs, and our legislation has been robustly modified under your tenure so far. And so to separate them in such a class, a protected class which they are, treat them as delinquent, and again in keeping with the schedule, but insofar as that particular rehabilitation period for juveniles should remain no greater than 3.5 years. And I just would submit to you that a 5-year rehabilitation for a juvenile is significantly high in terms of the purpose of sentencing and the purpose of a judge's wisdom in terms of giving a juvenile a custodial sentence, would seem to suggest that the rehabilitation would have taken place in the correctional institution, and then the quickest possible time for them to be a productive member of society would be to have the rehabilitation period significantly increased. So cut in half at 3.5 years. Now, the eligibility for expungement of offenses of sex with a person under the age of 16, sentenced for less than 10 years. The amendment dealing with this section, the amendment of this section, there's a real concern in relation again to the juveniles. So I'm making an appeal in relation to them because my question to you and a suggestion is, do we need automatic expungement for juveniles? And there's a hot debate in Jamaica in relation to how we treat the sexual offences registry. I know your position now is to keep it private, and you'll correct me, but and the debate as to whether it should be open, my position notwithstanding the right to privacy and all the concerns in the Constitution, that it should be a public, but not before considering automatic expungement for juveniles, and this is in relation to juveniles who are not using the child diversion programs because they remain today without the convictions not being expunged. So it's a short window for those juvenile persons, and I think the purpose and intention of this particular section was never made to cover juveniles. And that's clear from now sending it to child diversion. So this automatic expungement would cure the persons who were not able to benefit from child diversion, which is what we're currently using for this section for juveniles. So we can identify those persons, do the automatic expungement, and they would benefit from a change in the legislation and what is our forward thinking currently in the legislation. I think I'm on a roll. Wow. All right, so now in relation to, for once, I take it and I run with it. The factors to be considered by the board. This is, as I said, I raised it already, but I think that the board is where we are at. A national rehabilitation policy that can make clear what is our vision for our country. What's our vision for morality? What's our vision for corrective measures? So it would put the board in a place where they would have to give us annual reports. We would know when the applications are before the board, how many times the board sits, what informs their decisions to not allow the expungements, and strengthen the appeal process to the minister. So I think we should consider that as a section that would then open conversations about the third schedule in the future. Now, in relation to automatic expungement, that's your 28A, and this provides for automatic expungement of convictions for which non-custodial sentences were imposed and completed prior to January 1st, 2005. Excellent idea. My question to you is, are we going to return for 2006, 2007, 2008, or are we going to put an amendment that would simply say that expungements that are at 20 years, so annually, when it gets to 20 years, the clause would allow Parliament or allow the legislation to, when the 20 years reaches and these offenses arise, the automatic expungement where no clogs and fetters for the individual. It would simply prevent us from having to have this discussion at 2006, every year, annually. So that would cure that mischief. I have no objection to the changing of magistrate to parish court. It is forward thinking. No, the membership of the board. My only call would be to say that, again, the national rehabilitation policy. Looking forward to your green paper, which we'll debate where that is concerned. But certainly no objection there. Now, deleting offenses from the expungible list. I made the observation that all drug offenses were gone, were being deleted. Extortion, malicious injury to property, and fire of the dwelling house. My only question is that it's noteworthy that Section 39 and 40 of the Larceny Act remains unexpungible. That's burglary and housebreaking and committing a felony. I just want to know what informed you, or if it was something that was missed, because it appears to be a class of felony that could be removed. And then lastly, I would simply say that in relation to the third schedule, again, in closing, that where it is that citizens of the United Kingdom, if we breathe the same air, the law as it is right now, well, I'm putting it out there because a review seems to suggest that it is violent offenders that we really are trying to contain. The Jamaica as a high crime society is plagued with violent offenses. And so because convictions on a whole is again lumped between mala prohibita and mala nonce, and there's no public education as it is, persons see crime and then job opportunities are lost. Without the expungement, the opportunities for some of the best and brightest of us who would have stumbled maybe once or twice, they are also unable to apply for visas, apply for work programs, farm programs. Their life is stalled and they just simply don't have the opportunity. So a revisit of the third schedule more robustly, I would just humbly ask that is something to consider eventually. But if nothing else, in the now, before I take my seat, Madam Speaker. Okay, well, maybe I should have more conversations with you outside of this space. But before I take my seat, I'm strongly advocating for the rehabilitation period for adults to be 7 years and for juveniles 3.5 years. And it is the best practice as it is now. Thank you.
We'll have the member from St. James West Central, and then the member from St. Andrew Western. I think that concludes the members who have. You may? Okay, I'll hold.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to make my contribution to the debate on this bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. Madam